Hi, and welcome back to Azure Lowlands. I hope you've been enjoying our session so far. We're back with you today with a very inspiring panel. We have Marcel and we have April, and we're going to talk about GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps. Marcel, would you like to give a short introduction about yourself and maybe share a fun fact?
Sure. So my name is Marcel. I am the Global Managing Director of Xspirit and also the CTO there. I co-founded the company in 2014 and we grew out to a global company nowadays. And we are part of the Xebia group, which is like 6,000 people in size worldwide nowadays. Fun fact about me, I eat my M&Ms on the color of the rainbow. So when there's a bowl of M&Ms, I always need to start with orange. And then from orange you go to yellow, and then yellow, then you need to go to green, and then blue, and so forth and so forth. So that is the way I eat my M&Ms. It's kind of crazy, but yeah. And people at parties always make fun of me because of that. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Okay, so but you're nothing to do with OCD, right?
No, I just pretend to have OCD. So.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Great fun fact.
Okay.
How about you, April?
So I'm April Edwards. I sat with Marcel last year on this exact space. I'm a senior developer advocate at GitHub. I was about to say Microsoft, formerly Microsoft. I've been at GitHub for 3.5 months, and I help create content for GitHub. I work with the product groups and help with the community like we have here. And my fun fact, my GitHub handle is Scuba Ninja. And that was a nickname my mother gave me. I've been scuba diving for 30 years. I'm an avid tech diver, mixed gas diver. And she gave it to me because when I learned to dive, I wouldn't get out of the water. She literally couldn't get me out of the water. I just love diving so much.
Wow. So we have an experienced scuba diver and a fellow hubber. Hey.
Let's dive right in then. I'm going to start. I'm sorry.
That was so bad, Callum.
I'm going to start with a question for you, April. Very simple one. As someone who's worked at Microsoft, someone who now works at GitHub, true or false? Microsoft is killing Azure DevOps in favor of GitHub.
False.
Thank you.
Kind
okay,
of.
that's cleared everything up.
Mostly.
It's a question I've heard asked quite a lot, but what are the key differences? Why would someone use GitHub over Azure DevOps or the other way around?
With any tech, it depends. Right, it always depends on the use case, et cetera. So Microsoft acquired GitHub about 5 years ago because they want to get closer to the developer experience and bring those things to the platform. So they're putting a ton of funding into GitHub. So you're going to hear me talk about GitHub products and all this other good stuff. I integrated GitHub into Azure DevOps over 2 years ago, actually 3 years ago. Wow, maybe 4. I've been integrating the two products together for a very, very long time. And it really depends on what you're going to do. GitHub has, the home of open source code. It's a huge platform they're building out, but Azure DevOps is such a feature-rich product. It has everything built in one. So the problem you have is moving off that feature-rich product. Like GitHub is fantastic, but sometimes if you did it one way, you have to relearn how to do it the new way. And that's okay, because we're in tech because we want to learn. So you're going to see so many new features coming into GitHub every single month.
Fantastic. So the answer is choose whichever fits your workflow best, I guess.
Absolutely.
Marcel, we were talking just before we went live that there probably is a purpose for something like DevOps over Actions and where you'd use Actions. Do you have any insight on that? Like, when would you use one over the other?
Yeah, so there are two distinctions, I would say. So there's the whole notion of DevOps pipelines, which is actually the CI/CD product that helps you do continuous integration and continuous delivery. And on the GitHub side, that is the actions part. So, and there is a distinction in how the both function, I would say. If you look at, for example, GitHub Actions, Actions is the, I would say, workflow engine behind everything within GitHub. So if I would like to automate, for example, a pull request, or would send out mails, or whatever I want to do with that probably pull request that I created, I can automate the hell out of that. I can do anything I want. That is not in Azure DevOps. In Azure DevOps, it's really about the CI/CD part. So it's a distinction there. So if you look at the triggers that are there, in Actions, you have a trigger for almost everything. If you create like a branch rule, for example, you can fire an action for that. While in Azure DevOps, it's just the commit to source code, Well, they also have triggers from other ecosystems. So if something changes on, let's say, Docker Hub, because an image changed, you can run a CI on that so that you get like a new image out of it. Those are, I would say, the big distinctions there. And then if you look at the product side of things, I would say that in Azure DevOps, there are a couple of things that are not in GitHub. So for example, the whole notion about a test repository and a test artifacts that are in there, that is quite, I would say, differentiating between the two of them.
Yeah, so Actions versus DevOps pipelines, they're both task runners, but maybe Actions is a more generic task runner, whilst the DevOps pipelines are more specialized, as in my pipeline is for building an artifact and having that stored, and then I have a release pipeline that is for taking that artifact and deploying it.
And I would add to that, in Azure DevOps, there are two ways of doing this. So you have the notion of classic CI, and you have the notion of the YAML version, while in GitHub it's all YAML. So, and it's all committed to your Git repo and those kind of things.
And classic, excuse me, classic is going away. We want people to use YAML. Yet another markup language. I know.
Yeah.
It's time to embrace change and keep going.
Yeah.
That's in GitHub. That's why we do YAML. In Azure DevOps, we're doing completely YAML, but it's Azure DevOps YAML versus the YAML used in GitHub. So they're different. So there's another learning curve to throw in there.
Yeah, but you got ChatGPT to make a change there. So
Yes,
it's
AI
like,
will solve
it
all
can
of our
fix
problems.
Everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But the nice thing, and just as a tip, if you want to move from classic to YAML, you in the right-click menu, you can like dump out the YAML for me, then copy that and paste that into.
And people maybe don't know that, at least in DevOps, I've not experienced GitHub Actions too recently, so I'm not sure if this is the case. Correct me if I'm wrong. In DevOps, you can highlight a block of YAML, and it will actually give you a kind of UI for that, and you can add stuff in lines. There's sort of an editor around building that YAML up anyway. You're not sitting there hand coding, indenting everything as you need it to. Like it's kind of templated.
Yeah, Actions has templates you can already pre-bake. Someone already probably has an example of it. Like, you're not the only person that's had that problem. There are examples across the web. You can borrow someone's, and then you can actually add in different extensions into VS Code or Codespaces or Visual Studio or any other IDE you're using to help you write those. So there are examples out there. We have whole repositories of how to do it. So you're not going to be left solo.
It's my understanding that, as well, if someone's done all the hard work and written up an action, that I can effectively, in GitHub Actions, depend on that. So I can, in the action name, I can import someone's full GitHub URL, like a path from, they don't have to have published it on the Actions marketplace. It's just any GitHub, like username.
Any public repo. Any public repo.
With an action. Yeah. So I can have like a base template that I use maybe across my organization with all of that, all of our good stuff in there as a default, and just extend where I need. But in DevOps, I know you can have tasks and shared, but you can't. There's no concept of sharing that publicly other than having like something in the marketplace. Is that?
I'm not 100% sure if that's the case.
You can, it has to be a public URL. So if you're developing something in Azure DevOps, no. And the reason behind that is how the authentication mechanism works. So we've heard about security all day. We're going to hear about security at my talk. It's everywhere. And it's something people complained about. And actually working with Azure Bicep, that's a limitation of Bicep. You can't call that public URL to Bicep. So there are limitations in the products, various types of YAML, but people chose Azure DevOps as an enterprise product to keep their code secure and closed off. We've moved into open source, and there's some stat like 86% of organizations use open source and leverage it to be more effective. It's something with open source that makes it great, but also some people aren't quite keen on it yet.
So would it be fair to say that Azure DevOps is more enterprise leaning and GitHub is more general?
No, I wouldn't say that. No, because I think that is the general, I would say, conception. But to be honest, it is very usable, very helpful if it comes to just using your enterprise organization. And I can get anything in there if it comes to compliance and all these other things. And that's one of the things that I'm always big on is we want to deploy secure and compliant to our environments. And you can do that very well with GitHub.
And we have GitHub Enterprise as a product. I'm going to be talking about GitHub Enterprise today. I think people don't know about it. People grew up using GitHub for open source projects, in uni, all those places. And actually, we have a massive enterprise platform with security built in, and we're adding so many more features to it. So Azure DevOps is feature rich. GitHub is totally bringing those up to the playing field to make it a better product. So we're constantly adding stuff. We also have GitHub Enterprise Server, same as Azure DevOps Server, so you can run anything locally if there are constraints in data centers, et cetera. So we've absolutely addressed that.
And how easy to use is it out of the box? I mean, we have like several, our audience is very different. We have different levels. We have junior developers, we have senior developers, also maybe even managers, CTOs, CEOs. So for these folks, when they hear you talk about GitHub Actions and Azure DevOps, and like, hey, this is something we might or we could potentially use. How easy is it to set this up, to use this for your company? Do you need specific trainings? Do you need to go to a course like how to set up my infrastructure better? Where do I start?
Well, GitHub Advanced Security is literally the push of a button. Like you go in the portal, hit it, and it's enabled. But with great power comes great consequences. So it's about getting guardrails. So I work with a lot of customers that have templated how they deploy GitHub. They're using Terraform or another IAC tool, and they automate it. So they have all the guardrails lined up. So you as a developer don't have to push the button, but it's ready to go out of the box. But it is literally a push of a button to enable GitHub Advanced Security. So it's pretty simple.
And I would like to add to that if you look at it from an organizational perspective and using it all up, so there's this whole notion of how GitHub uses GitHub. So you can learn a lot about how you can do projects. For example, GitHub Projects is just a different perspective on how you do projects and how you do scheduling. And I love the way they set it up. It's quite different than what you know from Azure Boards, where it's really boards and it's more compete with Jira, for example. While I do see that you can use it for the organization, but it requires a little bit of, I would say, getting used to, because it's different than what you've been used to. Now that said, I think you can do amazing things with it because it has all this automation behind it. While that's not always the case in the other tools. I mean, if you move a card in Jira, yeah, you can do something, but it's not fully automated and integrated with everything. What I can do with GitHub is I can automate the hell out of that and even do something with my ERP system if I want to, because it's nothing more than firing up an action workflow that then can call into actions, and you can build your own actions with Docker containers, with JavaScript, what else you think is a good tooling to actually make that work. So I would say that the whole ecosystem of GitHub is more open and broader to integrate in your organization, but it requires a little bit of, I would say, getting used to and learning that before you can take action in it. I would not say that my CEO, for example, would start using GitHub right away. But one of the things that we do is, for example, we have things in a repository with Markdown, but we publish that with GitHub Pages, and all of a sudden it's nothing more than an intranet URL where he will go to and then can file a change, and the change will then be a pull request that somebody else then will accept, for example. So you can create those workflows also for your enterprise if you want to, but it requires a little bit of training.
And in terms of guardrails, safety, governance, security, because I know like a lot of companies are still like considering what's best for our use case. We are not allowed to host our data elsewhere outside the country. Like, is either on Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions like a good use case? Because I've heard stories for companies like, yes, but we work for like healthcare or the government. We are not allowed, so we will not touch these massive corporations, Microsoft, GitHub, because it's not secure enough. Or are they secure?
Yeah, you want to take that one?
Sure. So I live in the UK, and we've had Brexit happen, unfortunately. So I have a lot of UK organizations that in their defense contracts, data cannot leave the UK. So that is a problem.
Yes.
It is coming. It is on the roadmap. It's on our public roadmap. The dates might be changing, but it's there. We're aware of it. But there's a lot of data residency that we can do within Europe. So we can do a lot of things within Europe, West Europe, and things run in the Azure data centers. So there's more coming. We're very aware of it. But I think also I would question an organization of like, why are they complying to something? So FIS, financial industry, is a big one. They've always done something one way. It hasn't necessarily been the right way. So then it's teaching those DevOps practices, good cloud principles, and saying, yeah, I understand you used to have two very different data centers. Let's talk about resiliency in a very different manner, and that changes the story in the cloud.
Yeah, and I think to add to that there, of course, you have the whole notion of GitHub Enterprise Server, which you can also host. You can host that with just a few clicks yourself if you want to in your Azure data center. So having data residency then all of a sudden in your region. And that's a way to, I would say, get everybody acquainted with GitHub, work with GitHub, and the moment we get the data residency piece in there from GitHub itself, there's no change for, I would say, the end user. So it's like the intermediate step that you can use. And yeah, companies like us, we host that for you, we manage that for you. So like it is GitHub Cloud. So those are the things that we do to make it easy for our customers. But data residency is different if it comes to GitHub versus Azure DevOps, because Azure DevOps is in more or less all the regions.
And they're changing that. So when you log into Azure DevOps and you authenticate in, it's coming on the Azure backplane and your tenant. So where's your company based? That's how they do it. That is coming to GitHub. We've started implementing, it's called the EMU program, I believe. And we have it at Microsoft. I say we. I had it at Microsoft, but any Microsoft repositories, we had EMU access to do against our Active Directory account. So that's all coming. We know it's coming. That's also on the roadmap. So there's more improvements in that space to make that easier and more secure.
Yeah, and the EMU thing is really nice because you get full integration with Azure AD, and then also get conditional access and all these other things that you need as an enterprise.
So it really does sound like GitHub and Azure DevOps are both geared up really nicely for working with enterprise. There's no exceptions, and maybe where those shortcomings currently are, they're already on the roadmap and it's already being addressed. That's awesome. I was going to ask about the wider GitHub and Azure DevOps ecosystem and products, because there's a lot more to GitHub now than just repositories. There's code spaces, and we've got, well, we've mentioned actions, we've mentioned boards as well. What's exciting that's going on in GitHub, and equally, how does that compare to the equivalent offerings in the Azure space?
Yeah, so I love code spaces. It is one of my favorite products of GitHub because it makes it very easy for the developers to just get started and do the first commit. So the first time to commit when you onboard on the platform, it can be literally hours because your full dev environment is codified in your repository. And the only thing you do is, instead of doing a clone, you say start my code spaces, and you get then all of a sudden a full Visual Studio code IDE, either in your browser or pop it out to Visual Studio Code, and that's really cool.
Not many people know that you can do that, actually.
Oh, it is a well-hidden button, I would say, that you can pop it out. One of the other things that is amazing, and that's also not well known, is that there's actually dev containers behind it, meaning you can run it locally without running it in your GitHub environment. So there are some very nice things there. I use this a lot for the trainings that we do. So if I give like a training on Dapper, one of my favorite CNCF products, what we do is we have a full repository with all the steps and all the hands-on labs in a wiki in GitHub, and then they can go through all the steps, but the only thing they have to do is just click on a button. They do not have to install any tools. So it's like getting started in just a few minutes, and I love that a lot. And then, of course, everybody loves Copilot nowadays, and that's also part of the GitHub ecosystem.
Yeah, Copilot and Copilot Chat. April, can you talk a little bit about those?
Sure, I'm actually going to demo that today in my session. We'll see if Copilot plays along. It depends on the internet connectivity here. But Copilot's your AI pair programmer. I use it every single day to write code. I fix old code. I write unit tests with it. I use it to write documentation. It has helped a lot. But yeah, I use code spaces every day. So I rarely develop locally anymore. I also have a Mac, I have a PC, I have 2 PCs. So I can work between any 3 devices, doesn't matter. Cloud native projects have a bit of a startup time getting started. I can start on any project within a couple minutes, and I'm ready to go. So code spaces is huge. Copilot's huge. You're gonna see a lot more come out of Copilot in the next few months. We've called it Copilot X. And again, available what's coming, documentation capability, because no one likes writing documentation, and it's the biggest failure point of any project. Yep. So we've addressed it, it's coming. And then actions are actions, and they're stable, and there's gonna be more integration amongst the different products at GitHub, and that's gonna be the big change you see.
Fantastic. So actions is sort of forming the core, it would be safe to say, of a lot of these new products and experiences, rather than just necessarily unleashing new capability by adding new products. You're integrating better, and yeah, I think the demos I've seen of Copilot, at least, is it being, as you said, your pair programmer, asking for a review. How can I make this better? How can I make this more performant? Write me a test, write me some docs, like all the stuff we don't like doing.
Yep, it does it for you.
It does it for you, yeah.
And there's one other hidden gem, I would say, but that's more in the, I would say, dev ecosystem for Azure anyway, and that is the dev box. So if you are more like an enterprise organization where you would like to have a complete fended VNet where you have your developers in with, for example, Azure, the vendor in there, and all these other things for developers, then you can stand that up because it's now also part of the development and DevOps options that you have within the Visual Studio environment.
I don't want to steal too much from April's talk later either, because I know you're going to talk a little bit about security, but there's also ways to connect something like code spaces with private infrastructure. Is that correct?
I will talk about that later.
Okay, we won't
Don't steal
spoil
my
it.
thunder. Yeah, I'll talk about that later.
Cool.
So quick question. So how do GitHub Actions and Azure pipelines handle cross-platform deployments? So Windows, Linux, Mac OS. April?
Beautifully. They're both identical in that. You can develop on Mac, Linux, or Windows, any platform, any code. Both are identical to that. So no matter what code you're writing your code in, whether it's Golang, C#, Ruby, doesn't matter, and you can literally deploy it anywhere, on-prem to any of the clouds as well.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that I address in the book that I'm writing with my colleagues at the moment.
Wait, you're writing a book?
Yes,
I am too.
yeah, oh good.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't supposed to say that loud.
Yeah,
I'm writing
okay.
a book.
No, okay.
Apparently.
Shameless plug.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah,
ahead.
Yeah. So I'm writing a book together with Michael Kaufman, Rob Boss, and myself on, we call it Actions in Actions, part of the Manning publishing organization. And we are writing a book there where we address, for example, deploying to all these different platforms. And the whole notion is that you have your job you can, I would say, pin it to a specific runner that can be on Linux, Mac, or Windows, and based on that you can then deploy to any of these platforms. So that's one of the things that you can do if it comes to Actions, but also if it comes to Azure DevOps pipelines.
And how about the book that you're writing, April?
It's not public knowledge, but I'll start a little bit. So I have worked in the ops region. I've worked in the developer side. IT pros can learn a lot from developers. And there's a lot of things we do, ceremonies, the way we work. The biggest hurdle for IT pros is understanding why Git. Why do I need Git? So I'm writing a series, Git for the IT pro. So when we talk about Git, we're always teaching it in the developer way, and they're going, I don't know. So I am co-authoring this with someone whose name is very big in the PowerShell world. I don't want to throw him under the bus just yet. We've just agreed to do this. So I'm hoping the next few months I will have some content out around Git for the IT pro.
Yeah.
Why would you feel, or why, is this feedback you've heard from IT professionals why they want to use Git? Because I'm curious about the use cases. Why would they need to use Git?
So there's a great story, right? You've saved a file and you save different versions of it. You put it in SharePoint if you're lucky, and then you lose the file. We've all done it. So telling an IT pro why we need Git is the first step. They don't get it. They don't want to know. They're like, Devi tool, 10-foot pole. So it's one, understanding why we need that, why we need source control, and then understanding Git mechanisms. The hard part about this is when you start using GitHub, code spaces, there are extensions built in to make this easier, but we need to learn the fundamentals. It's kind of learning to walk before you can run. So I want to teach the fundamentals because so many IT pros out there are like, why would I need source control? They just put their scripts on a file share, they keep them on their machine, they don't automate anything. So telling them how to use GitHub Actions to help them be a better IT pro. So it's getting the fundamentals in because as developers, we're just inherently using it.
Designers have been doing source control for years and years, probably even before Git, with like final. And actually now, Figma, for example, it's a design tool, has baked source control into the product. So it's becoming more and more common. And I think that sounds like a fantastic angle, at least not Git for non-developers, basically.
Yes, exactly.
And if it comes to the designer files, you need to have GitHub LFS, of course, like large file system. Otherwise, it will be like a big mess. So,
Indeed, you do.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both. We've unfortunately come to the end of our time. But just very quickly before we leave, what are you looking forward to today? Any specific sessions?
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to your session on code spaces because, like I said, I love code spaces. So I'm really looking forward to that one. Yeah.
I'm biased. I want to see code spaces. But also at the same time as my talk, Rick Hepworth is doing a talk on horror stories, which is going to be amazing. And he has a voice today, so he might be the better one to listen to.
And Rick's actually coming up next, so we'll be talking about common Azure traps. But thank you both for joining us, and we'll see you in a short moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.